Hello there, welcome to Tyke Farming in the Philippines. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, ding-a-ling-ding-dong, that bell. It's Sunday morning, 9:45, and I wanted to make a video about my experiences here. Before I came here, I looked at a lot of YouTube videos, and very often they're all doom and gloom about scams and scamming and Filipino women ripping foreigners off and all this sort of thing. And there's a great deal of negative videos on there, and these are a good thing because I looked at them, a lot of them, and it makes you aware, and you've got to be wide awake. Any country in the world, it's not particularly the Philippines, but if you're not awake, you will get taken advantage of. There's nothing surer than that. So this is about my experience and how I found the Philippines and what I've done to protect myself as best I can. When they're talking about scams, this will be a positive video because my experience is positive. That's the only reason. If you've had a negative experience here, then the video is going to be negative, obviously. But when you're talking about scams on these YouTube videos, they go on and on and on about skin tax, being scammed with the taxi drivers, being scammed on the market, paying more than Filipinos, and on and on and on. It's nonsense, absolute bloody nonsense. If you go on the market here as a foreigner and you buy some potatoes, they'll charge you $1.60 a kilo. If you're a Filipino, they'll charge you $1.40 a kilo. If you get a taxi here and they're not on the meter, they'll charge you a little bit more because you're a foreigner. But we're talking about pennies. It's that small amount of money that it doesn't really need talking about. And the impression is you're going to get scammed at every street corner. But it's pennies. If you go in a taxi and there's no meter on, when you get to your destination, don't tip the taxi driver. He's already taken his tip. He's charging you more than what he would have got on the meter. He's already got his tip, so don't tip him. And then you finish your people. If a foreigner gets in a taxi on the meter and it's 450 pesos for the taxi fare, invariably he's going to give him 500 pesos and say keep the change. So all these scams that go on about with skin tax and foreigners paying more, it's just nonsense. It's pennies. It's not even worth talking about. If you want to pay the same price as Filipinos for a kilo to take potatoes, go into the shopping mall and pay $1.80 a kilo for him. Everybody pays the same price in the shopping malls. If you want your potatoes a bit cheaper, go down the wet market and pay $1.60 a kilo. If you want them a bit cheaper than that, send your partner and stay out the way. She'll get them for $1.40 a kilo. But it's pennies. It's not even worth thinking about. I've got an idiot list in front of me. So you get to the you get to the Philippines, and everybody's wanting something different, but majority of foreign men coming here are looking for a partner or a good time or whatever. Usually it will involve a female, but not all the time, of course. There's people of different persuasions. You can get that here as well, I would imagine, but I've never been down that road, so I wouldn't really know. So, what sort of woman should you look for? And on these videos they'll say province girls are better than city girls. That may be true, may not be true, I don't know. But I'm not a city person, so I came to the provinces because that's where I wanted to set up. If I was a city person, I'd have gone to the city, but I'm not. And you get involved with a lady here, and one thing leads to another. If you're going to stay, then inevitably you start thinking about finding a place to live or buying some land or whatever. And then you're investing in your future, and you need to protect yourself as best you can. And that's not easy. I researched a fair bit before I came, and not on YouTube. I like to research on Google, and I like to read paperwork, especially paperwork where you've got references and you can go and check out them references from another. These are usually university papers or that sort of book. And I read about a fella his relationship had turned sour. Everything was in his wife or girlfriend's name, and he lost the house or land or whatever it was he'd bought. But he wasn't happy with that. So he appealed. He lost the appeal, and then he appealed to the Supreme Court in the Philippines, and he lost there. So instead of losing X amount of money on his house or whatever he bought, he lost probably twice as much appealing all the way to the Supreme Court. So he lost 3 times over, to my way of thinking. But it was good reading for me. Now, all that is established and it's precedented in Filipino law, and it's good to be aware of these things, because you're not going to change the law and you're not going to change them precedents. So Filipino law, my understanding, there's 3 laws in the world. There's English common law, there's Napoleonic law in the rest of Europe apart from Britain. Used to be in Britain as well when they're in the common market, but I assume now they called it superior law. It overshot all English common law, but now UK is out of the common market. I assume that English common law is front and centre again. So you've got English common law, Napoleonic code law in all of Europe, including Russia, and then you've got Shia law, which is Muslim law. Now, in the Philippines, the Filipino law, as I understand it, I've read, is a mixture between English common law, the Filipino Constitution, and the American Constitution. Of course, America is English common law, as is Canada, Australia, parts of Africa, parts of the Caribbean. English common law is worldwide. But obviously in different countries they have different variations and different interpretations. So if you're coming from America or Canada or Britain, Australia, you have a basic understanding of the law here and the similarities which do exist. But you need to be aware that the law is not necessarily as it is in your own countries. And I've seen videos where they say courts here in the Philippines are biased. Of course they're biased. They're biased in every country. You've got family law. Them courts are biased to the children, which is a good thing. You've got the criminal courts, and they're biased to the Crown. Not as bad as Napoleonic Code law, where you basically got to prove your innocence. English common law, in theory, you're innocent until proven guilty. In practice, you've got a big fight on your hand because the courts are biased to the Crown. And then you've got what they call in England county courts, and they deal with contracts and all this, that and the other. Now they're the least biased courts. Contract law is set in stone, international agreements and everything else. It's very hard for a judge to contradict contract law, and if he did so, you'd certainly win on appeal, because they can't allow contract law to be changed due to international agreements, etc., etc. This is a very basic understanding I have, because I've not studied law or anything like that, and this is certainly not a legal advice. It's just my opinion and what I've done in my own situation coming up. So, reading all that before I came, then I got into a relationship, and then I wanted to take it further. I wanted to buy a house, land or whatever. Now, I settled in the provinces because that's the life I want to lead. If you're a city person, you'll find good women in the city as well, make no mistake. You probably won't find good women in Angeles City, or there will be good women there for certain. But if you're going down the beer bars, you're unlikely to meet the person you want to settle down with, in my opinion. But you may do, aren't you? You might want to settle down with a woman who wants to go to the pub 7 nights a week and drink as much as you. Well, you'll certainly find one of them in the city, I would imagine. I don't go to beer bars anymore. I don't drink anymore. I used to, but age has caught up with me. So I've just been checking the video, what I've done so far. So hopefully it'll make sense. Maybe won't, who knows. But I've got one story I've seen on YouTube, and this is maybe puts into context how I think. And this involved an Australian fella in his 60s, and he came to the Philippines, and he met this woman, and then he left that woman, and he met another woman, and with the other woman he built a house and set up a sari-sari shop, and then he went back to the first woman. And then there's a video on YouTube. He was in court, or a tribunal, whatever it was, and it was during COVID, so it had the court procedures on YouTube, and the judges sat there, and he's hearing arguments from him, and he's hearing arguments from the woman involved who had the house. And of course the house was built, the land was bought, I assume, and the house was built in her name, and he was trying to get half the money back. And it was interesting in so much that it created a love triangle, and then the woman who'd been given the flick, if you want, he was trying to get money back off her legally via the court. And the judge said something interesting. He said, if you give a gift to your partner, it's a gift. If that relationship turns sour, it doesn't become a debt. So that's the way the legal profession sees, same as me here, the land in the partner's name. It's a gift. That's how it's seen in the Philippines legally. And if you leave that woman, or she leaves you, then it doesn't become a debt. It's still a gift. The other interesting thing about the case was, if you go to court, you've got to develop an argument. You can't just go to court and say, I want half of that, or I want half of this. You've got to have an argument. Now, this Australian fella, he had no argument whatsoever. All he could say was she was a gold digger. And he said that time after time after time. She's a gold digger. He'd no other argument. Now, that's not going to impress any judge in any country in the world. But this judge, he tried to mediate. Now, it might have been a tribunal, you know, it might not have been a courtroom, but he did try to mediate. And he said to the third woman, who wasn't on video, she was on just a telephone line, but she sounded quite a nice person. And apparently, when he'd left her for the first woman, got back to the first woman, she did talk to him and say she would have him back, but he preferred the first woman. So the judge said to her, are you prepared to sell the house and divide the money? And she just point blank said no. So the judge had nowhere to go after that. So the Australian fella got nothing, unsurprisingly. He didn't even have an argument, other than he spurted out from time to time, she's a gold digger. So, yeah, the other thing about, when I was reading about the case that went to the Supreme Court in the Philippines, the judge in that case determined that the land was in the Filipino partner's name, obviously, and anything built on that land, i.e. a house, a sari shop I've got, a piggery I've got here, is part of the land. You can't separate it. The only thing I could take off here legally is the truck, any of the furniture, which is all cheap furniture apart from the bed, the stock, the cabin if I could get it out from under the veranda, but the veranda's fastened to it because that's a mobile house, cabin, container house. In theory I could take that, but that's all I can take off of this side. All the buildings, the fence, everything I've invested my money in is part of the land now, that President's set. And that's in Jean's name, she owns everything. So what do you do to protect yourself? Now, it's commonly known on YouTube videos that you can get a lease, and you lease back the land, and it's a 25-year lease, and you can renew it for 25 years, and that's what I've done. But that doesn't mean you're safe, that you've secured everything. You've got to think a little bit deeper than that. So me and Jean have a contract. The difference is our contract is transferable. I'll get on to that in a minute. Now, we're not married. Which is important. So we drew up the lease, 25-year lease. I made it transferable. So if things turn sour for me, I can sell this lease to a third party, whether it be another foreigner or a Filipino, makes no difference. I can actually sell the lease, and there's 23 years left on that lease, so it has a value, especially with what I put up here with the piggery and the sari shop. So I could probably recover maybe a third or half my money back. I wouldn't lose it all by selling the lease. So that's how I did it. Now, but you need to be aware that it's more than that. Now, before we built anything on this land, we had the lease agreement drawn up by a lawyer. He could have made it impossible for Jean to have anything to do with this land, which I rejected. But he was on about making a mortgage out to Jean to pay me back at such a high interest she'd never ever pay it back. But it didn't seem very fair to me, so I just had the ordinary lease, which was transferable, 25 years. So like I was saying, I can sell that lease and recover some of the money if I needed to. I don't expect I ever will. But like I was saying, it's not quite that simple though. Before as soon as that lease was drawn up, I hadn't actually set the bank account up, but I set it up 2 or 3 days later. But I immediately got a book, and I wrote on the front rent book. And every month I pay Jean 1,100 pesos rent. When the lawyers asked me what I want to pay rent, I said 1,000 pesos a week. He said, no, too much money. And I said, well, what's a reasonable rent for a piece of land this size in the provinces? Now that's important. You've got to pay a reasonable rent, and that's just the same whether it's too high or too low. The figure he came up with was 1,100 pesos a month, and that's what I pay. And I had it written down in the rent book, and Jean signed it. And then after we'd set the bank accounts up, I transfer money into Jean's account every month, 1,100 pesos. So there's a record of the rent paid over the last 2 years and going forward, and it's important to have that record, because there's many court cases in the Philippines where they've had lease agreements and whatever have you, and they've been null and void because the judge decided that the lease agreement, it was in place just to get around Filipino law, which states foreigners can't own land. And once the agreement's null and void, everything's gone. So I would advise you have a record of the rent you pay on your lease, pay it religiously, and make sure it's not too high or too low. Otherwise a court may find that you're just trying to get round the law and make it null and void. So I'm trying to think what else I did. yeah, I think that's maybe it. Yeah, but the main thing, of course, is to take your time. Or I remember another point now. But the main thing is to take your time and pick a nice woman. A lot of foreigners come here to the Philippines, and they're in the 60s and 70s, and they want a young woman. Very pretty 18, 20-year-old. And you see them walking around, not so much up here, but in Danao you see the odd one or two, and in the city you see many. And they've got this 20-year-old girl on their arm, and yeah, she's beautiful and everything else. I wouldn't have the bloody patience with a 20-year-old. I wouldn't have the desire with a 20-year-old. I wanted a young woman. And 35, as Jean is now, is a young woman to me. And I wasn't looking for a supermodel. I wanted a nice woman with a bit of intelligence and a nice disposition. And I give it 6 months, and I decided it was worth taking things further forward with Jean. And yeah, we've got a good relationship. I'm happy. I don't foresee any problems, but you never know. I'll pause here and I'll have a think, see if I've missed anything out. Yeah, the other thing with the lease, I've read, it's better if you set the lease up before you get married, if you get married. If you're already married, obviously you can't do that, but courts have seen that when a lease is exchanged between a couple in a relationship, if you're married, it's more likely to be seen as a way of getting around Filipino law, and there's a bigger chance of that agreement being null and void. So if you can, get a lease agreement going before you marry, and make sure you pay that bloody rent and you got a record of it. Now, as to who owns what on this site, Jean owns everything, but I own the lease, and that gives me a bit of security. And I've set it up the best I can, like I'm saying, with rent and whatever have you. But there's nothing foolproof. But the money I've spent on this site, which is considerable in Filipino terms, and was a chunk of money in Western terms as well, I'm happy with the value I've got for that money. I'm happy to have invested it. I've got a good life here. And at my age, money has very little meaning anymore. I don't want a new car anymore. I don't want to go to pubs drinking anymore. Don't want to travel anymore, really. I just want to stay at home and have a quiet life, which is quite difficult in the Philippines, anybody who's been here. But I can ignore noise. Apart from making a video, that's why I'm sat on the road we built. I can't go down the piggery and make it because they're cutting me over, and I can't sit in the veranda because a young niece is in there. Boy, she's bloody loud. So I'm sat outside on the roadway. Yeah, I hope this video has made a bit of sense to somebody if they're thinking of coming here. And if it's all bullshit, it's all bullshit. I don't care. So we'll leave it there, and we'll see you all later. Just as a footnote to that video, I was referring to the rent as 1,100 pesos a month. It's 2,100 pesos a month.